In your recent quarterly bulletin, you flag there are some areas which can improve, mainly the non-market sector, which I understand is things like education, training, healthcare and social assistance. So where's the opportunity here to improve productivity?
Yeah, so that's right. So what we've seen in Australia is over the last year, although aggregate productivity has been flat, it has increased in the market sector where goods and services are exchanged for market prices. In the non-market sector, as you mentioned, things like healthcare, education, things where they're either provided by government for free or with a large subsidy. We saw productivity actually go backwards by 2.2% over the last year. And so there's opportunities there to really improve the quality of those services, funding arrangements, and innovation in the public sector across all of those areas.
Yeah, you mentioned productivity is about working harder, not smarter, not harder. Look, the recent monthly unemployment numbers for May showed the jobs market is still pretty tight in Australia, but hours worked actually fell. So how do you get employers to start building up the hours worked again in our economy?
Yeah, so what we've seen over the last year is actually, hours worked have fallen in aggregate, but in the non-market sector, hours worked have increased by 5.5%. So there's been a very large increase in number of hours worked in areas like healthcare, social assistance, childcare, things like the NDIS. And so we're seeing a big growth in hours in those areas. But, the vast majority of economic activity is undertaken in the private sector. And so we need to have policies that encourage hiring and new jobs. But the labour market is very tight. We've got low unemployment and although vacancies have started to fall, it is still a relatively tight labour market. So it's a struggle for employers to be able to get the workers that they need and the productive workers that they need in this environment.
But when you take a few steps back, would you say overall one of the underlying trends we're starting to see is a bit of a slowing in labour demand in Australia? Is that kind of a byproduct of our GDP growth being pretty weak at the moment as well?
Yeah, so labour demand has started to slow, but the market for workers is still very tight. And we see that in the productivity numbers actually. So every additional worker that is employed or every additional hour worked in that environment, you're in a situation where unemployment's very low. You might get inexperienced workers coming in or workers that need a bit of on-the-job training. And that human capital takes a long time to build up. And so in both the market and non-market sectors, that's one of the reasons why we see this cyclical pattern in productivity, and it's flat over the last year, is that the extra workers that are coming in at this stage of the cycle are not as productive as the workers that were already there.
This week, the government have introduced the Future Made in Australia Act to Parliament, and part of it involves providing subsidies to certain industries around the country. How much of a risk could this be to productivity, having businesses that could potentially be reliant on subsidies to keep operating?
Well, look, we haven't analysed those specific policies at the Commission. We do put out every year a trade and assistance review where we just track the amount of assistance that's provided to industry. And so these measures will appear in coming years in that publication. We do have a general view at the Commission, though, that although the rest of the world is engaging in more and more industry policy, for a country like Australia, we're a small open economy, there are risks in us trying to match that huge spending in the US and Europe and China and elsewhere. And so we do have to be careful that we respond appropriately in general to those industry policy developments around the world, because it can start to look like protectionism in some instances.
Yeah, I guess the government's argument is we need to compete with these other big nations around the world that are doing the same thing. So they're kind of in a difficult position as well.
Yeah, and that's why we have called for careful cost-benefit analysis of measures like this. I mean, there are genuine concerns around national security, response to net zero, vulnerable supply chains. Those are all legitimate concerns, but they all play out differently across different industries. and in relation to different industry policies around the world, and they each require a very careful and hard-headed assessment about whether the benefits exceed the costs.
You mentioned artificial intelligence at the beginning, but it's pretty clear Aussie businesses are starting to explore the benefits of it, but it can obviously improve productivity a lot. But how do you get the balance right to prevent mass job losses across various different industries?
Well, we think that there are big opportunities for artificial intelligence for improving productivity across Australia. I think the best approach is to have the regulations in place that we already have in a lot of cases to deal with what's coming, and let the jobs market really play out. I mean, those decisions will be made by individual businesses across Australia. They'll assess whether the benefits of AI outweigh the costs, and it's really the key is to have a dynamic, competitive and open economy to take advantage of all of those upsides.
And just finally, what does the recent surge in inflation mean for future productivity growth? Surely it's going to result in businesses increasing their prices again, and in theory, it should reduce productivity even more, shouldn't it?
Well, I think there is a link between productivity and real wage growth. It's a very close link. And real wage growth, if you think about it, that is really the cost of living challenge that people are facing at the moment. If their wage is going up by more than inflation, they're getting a real wage increase and they feel as though their living standards are rising. Whereas if the opposite is true, they're going backwards. And so what we think is that the key to all of this cost of living challenge is to have productivity enhancing policies in place that will allow individuals to work smarter, not harder or longer, and reap the benefits that productivity gains can enjoy right across the economy.
Well, Alex Robson, Deputy Chair of the Productivity Commission, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.